Welcome to a new chapter of YMT 220 Economics. So this is chapter 4, and in this chapter we will discuss how markets work, or in other words, the controlling forces of the market, and these forces are actually supply and demand. So when we speak about market, what is it actually, the market, or what can be defined as a market, or how can we define a market? In brief, when we have a group of people or group of interested parties that conduct buying and selling of particular goods and services, then we have a market. This can be of individuals, that means people, human beings, or it could be companies or communities or nations. So it depends on the type of the product or the good or the service. So that determines which kind of organization or individual or nation that is interested in buying or selling. So a group of buyers and sellers organize themselves within certain, you can say, community, and that's exactly the market. So buyers are interested in actually buying a product or demanding a product or a service. This is the definition of buyers, and sellers actually those who supply the product or produce it and sell it or provide it to the market to sell it. All right, so we will not have all markets same. We have different markets, and the one we are particularly interested in this chapter is what we call competitive market. In competitive market, we have special definitions or special actually cases that we consider to call a market or a general market a competitive market. In basic sense, we have so many buyers and sellers. Imagine that they are so many, so that the effect or the impact of one of them, a buyer or a seller, is negligible. That means we can just neglect the effect of only one individual or one seller or one buyer, and that will help us to have a competitive market because of the high population, or you can say the population of sellers and buyers. All right. So this is the main condition. This is a competitive market where we have so many buyers and sellers. The impact of one can be neglected, can be just ignored compared to the rest of the population of the market, of the buyers and sellers in the market. All right, so let's move forward. One more thing before I move forward. Competitive market can be perfectly competitive. What does it mean? So the goods and services that are offered in such a perfectly competitive market, they are nearly the same. What does it mean? It means, let's say we have so many sellers of certain item. Since we are in Turkey at the moment, and this class is taught in Turkey, I will give you a very sensible example, a common example that people daily face in this country. Actually, the bread. So the bread that people have in Turkey usually is produced by so many bakeries, and you can find it almost nearly everywhere. And the taste of the bread, certain item of this bread, can be almost same from one bakery to another, of course with little bit of exceptions. However, the item itself, called bread here, pick up a type of it, it would be almost same for all bakeries available. All right, so this is the first condition for perfect market. The second one applies to the competitive market. That means we have numerous buyers and sellers that compose the whole market. So if we say perfectly competitive, the goods and services, when we compare them from these competitor sellers, we find them almost similar or almost same. Okay, let's carry on. Quantity demanded. Now we mentioned about perfect market, and this will be our assumption for the whole chapter, that we are dealing with perfectly competitive market. So in that case, what we refer to by quantity demanded in this case is exactly the quantity that the amount of, or the quantity or the amount of goods or services that buyers are willing and able to purchase or buy. So you may think about two conditions here, the willingness and the ability. And this will determine the quantity demanded. Demanded by whom? By buyers. Okay, the law of demand. Now, if we put everything fixed, that means we set up all the conditions to constant, we stabilize all conditions. Now, when we have a price of a good or a service, it doesn't matter, it's not necessarily good all the time, it's not necessarily a commodity or any other type of product, it could be a service. If the price of this good or service rises, what happens? The quantity demanded will fall. So basically we have this kind of relation. If we put everything fixed except the price, so if the price changes, now the change, if it is rising, then the quantity will fall. The other way around, if the price of a good falls and everything else is stabilized, other factors, that means we may have other influencing factors. So if we stabilize all of them and change the price, that means we let the price fall or the price to decrease, what happens? The quantity demanded will increase. And this is the law of demand. And this is extremely important while discussing the demand force in the market. How can we represent the demand? We have two main ways for representing the demand in a market. We have something we call demand schedule. So the schedule is exactly a table. This table is representing the relationship between the price of a good or service and the quantity demanded of this good or service. So it's just a table, the price versus quantity. So at certain price we have certain quantity demanded. And from this table or schedule, we can create something we call demand curve. So this curve is actually a type of a graph where we put every number or every, you can say, dot that links the price and the demanded quantity at certain price, and we connect all these dots together, then we will have a curve. And it's not necessarily to be a real curve. In most cases, if we discuss or consider only one buyer, in this case we will have a straight line most likely. It depends actually, but in simple cases or typical cases we may have just a straight line. That is easier for even understanding as a typical example. So in communities or in a perfectly competitive market, we don't have individual demand curve or demand schedule. We have so many. However, as we explained in chapter 2, sorry, not 1, when we model an economical problem, we need to have basic sense of modeling. That means we cannot model each and every one in the community. How about if we take some, then we generalize the case as what applies to one applies to most others in perfectly competitive markets. So let's do that. And here what I was explaining earlier without any schematic diagram, so that now you will understand. Now look at the demand of an individual. This is Catherine's demand. It could be of any person, just an individual who's consuming an ice cream. Ice cream is just a good, it's just a product that the person is buying. So here we have the price of the ice cream cone and the quantity of cones demanded by the consumer or the buyer. So at price 0, you may tell me, okay, there is no price 0 for some reason, just assume it. This is an assumption. The buyer will demand 12. At 50 cents, the buyer will demand 10. and it goes on. So we have the schedule. How can we represent it? As I said earlier, this is a dot. So if you take XY axis, you can put this dot somewhere next to it, next to it, next to it. Then you can connect all these dots together like this. So one thing I forgot to say, y-axis represents the price in the demand while drawing the demand curve. So y-axis is the price, remember it, and x-axis represents the quantity demanded. So you place all these dots or point them down or draw them or just place them, then connect all these dots together, you will get what we call demand curve. So what do we need from this illustration? What will it help us for? It will help us a lot actually, and in many aspects or in many cases, and we will see soon enough while we are explaining. Again, the demand schedule is representing the price of a good or a service and the quantity demanded at that price. So we will have different prices and different quantity demanded at these prices. Then we can represent them graphically by placing these dots exactly where they are on x and y axis. Y-axis represents the price and x-axis represents the quantity demanded of the item or the goods or the good or the service. And then we can just draw the curve. And most likely, in most cases, in our discussion will be a straight line. It's easier for understanding. Okay. Now, one thing I have to tell you, one thing I have to show you. Now, if we decrease the price, if we lower the price, what will happen? Now, see, this is the law of demand, an increase in the quantity demanded. Now, if we go up, if the price goes up, what happens? The quantity demanded will go down. Now, let's just see this assumption. Now, look. When the price is low, the quantity demanded is max. As the price goes high, the quantity demanded reduces until we reach to somewhere where the quantity demanded will become zero. That means the buyer is no longer willing or able to buy the product or the service. All right, demand. So we explain about the market demand as a curve, but that's for an individual, just one person. And in reality, in economy, we don't have only an individual representation of one person's demand curve. We have so many buyers. So how do we do it? We sum up all the demands to represent it towards x-axis or horizontal. So in that case, we will sum up all the demands, and that will compose for us something we call the demand curve for all, or the community, or the whole nation, or the whole group of buyers. So it varies depending on the total sum up of all quantities demanded by all buyers, and that is usually the case when we consider an increment or decrement of price, or fall of price and increment of quantity. We stabilize other factors, so we disregard them. In that case, we will be able to study the relationship between the change of a price and the demanded quantity, and vice versa. All right, now have a look. Assume that we have actually more than one buyer. We have, let's say, two. This is the minimum that represents more than one. It may be more than this, so we sum up the available quantities. The available, you may tell me, how do you sum them up? Okay, look, just pick up 2 points, and that is enough for you. Let's pick up at here now, for example, at zero. At price 0, Catherine is demanding, or is actually buying 12 cones of ice cream, while Nicholas is buying 7. So if we sum them up, we will get 19. So this is 1 point. Pick up another point. Now for let me check. Actually, I should have provided the demand schedule for Nicholas, but it doesn't matter because we can pick it up. Let's say at price 3 here it's available. Nicholas is demanding 1 cone of ice cream, so we can sum up the 1 here for this price plus 0, because at the price of 3, Catherine is not demanding or is not buying any. So 1 plus 0, that's 1. So 1 is intersecting with 3, so we have this point here, and we have 19, so you can connect them together. Then you will come up with the demand curve of the whole market. Now, we are just considering 2 because it's extremely difficult to consider the whole community. That's not possible. If you sum them up all, you cannot do it individually. You can just come for the demand based on the whole community, not just one individual. So that will be studied in the next part, or the second part of this chapter, or might be not even the second part, actually the next chapter we will discuss it. All right, so we sum up, and these mathematically can be represented, summing up the points exactly where they intersect with some prices. You can pick up 2 points and you sum them up, then you will be able to create a straight line by connecting these 2 points. Then you will have the demand curve of the whole market. We usually ask these questions. That means I may provide you with 2 demand schedules, and I ask you to plot or draw the demand curve for the whole market. This is possible. It's a possible question. I will provide some examples soon enough, separately. Okay, so we have the demand curve. Now, the demand curve, what does it represent? Actually, it's extremely interesting in studying this market demand force, or the force of demand, how it controls the market. Imagine if any increase in the demand of the whole market for certain item or for certain product or service, what happens? Now let's just get back to here. Let's say at a fixed price, let's say at $2 for a cone of an ice cream, the demand of this person, Nicholas, increases from 3 to 5. What happens? So we are shifting this point, 3 and 2, it will be 5 and 2. So the whole curve will shift to the right. The whole curve itself will shift to the right. So shifting the curve to the right means increasing the demand at fixed prices, or at the same price. That means we get an increment in demand. So this will allow us to study this force. Why would we demand more quantities or more quantity of an item while the price is fixed? Well, there are many reasons. Just think, I'll give you one reason now, and then we will discuss all of them. Imagine now currently in this time, let's say for some reason we have a lot of news about the outbreak of corona, and people are actually buying like sanitizers or rubbing alcohol or whatever for cleaning, maybe also the cleaning products like Clorox and some other hygiene stuff. Well, let's say for some reason the government is monitoring, controlling the prices, so the sellers cannot increase the prices. However, the demand is increasing. Why? Because people feel the need for this item at that moment. This is one of the reasons. Okay, so this shift to the right determines that the interest of having or owning more items at the same price. Well, as I said, there are many other reasons. I'll explain them in a while. How about if at the same price, at $2, Nicholas changes his behavior of consumption, and let's say he's consuming 1 only. So what will happen to this curve? So 1 and 2 will be here, and the whole curve will shift to the left, and that's a decrement in the quantity demanded, or decrease in the quantity demanded. Okay, so an increase in the quantity demanded at a fixed price moves or shifts the curve to the right. A decrease in the quantity demanded at a fixed price or a certain price will produce a shift to the curve to the left side. Okay, so look at this. This is the representation. This is what I was mentioning about. But now if we fix the price, because if the price changes, then that's another behavior. It applies to the law of demand, not exactly the shift to the right or to the left. Okay, so what kind of factors or variables that actually enforce or encourage the shift of the curve? As I said earlier, one of them is the expectation. For example, the one I was mentioning. Expectation of what? Expectation could be you expect that the product will run out from the market due to the huge demand, like now, for cleaning material or for hygienic material, sanitizer, or maybe mask or whatever, due to some conditions available in the whole globe. This is expectation. Another type of expectation, let's say you are expecting to have more income. So what happens? Well, if you have more income and if you have an item, good or service that you consume regularly, usually in your daily activity, since you have more income, most likely you will consume more. If you have less income, you will consume less. But this applies for in two different categories. Let me explain now. We have two types of goods. These goods actually can be categorized as normal goods and inferior goods. For normal goods, these are goods that we usually consume more when we have more income, okay? Or when our expectation about the future is actually more relaxed, that we know our budget will be more relaxed in near future. All right, so normal goods, you think of them as any actually goods that we consume on our daily basis. Pick up any example, an item that you consume a lot, your best chocolate or your best drink or whatever you like and you need to buy. So this could be exactly a typical example of a normal good. How about inferior goods? Inferior goods, actually, your expectation of having more income makes you to spend less on them or to demand them in a less case, or to decrease your demand to them. Such an example of taking a ride by bus. If you have more income, you wouldn't go for a bus. Maybe you will take a taxi, or maybe you will buy your own car. So this is the idea of goods. Actually, it depends on the income, but if it is a normal good, you will spend more on them, so you will demand them more. If inferior goods, you will spend less on them or demand them less based on your income, the increment in income. If you are expecting to have less income, or if you already have less income, so you will spend less on normal goods and more on inferior goods. So it's exactly the opposite. Prices of related goods. Now we have two types of related goods. We have substitutes and complements. For the substitutes, actually the substitutes, an item that substitutes another item. Think about, let's say, tea and coffee in many cultures. Well, a lot of people may replace tea with coffee for some reason, or coffee with tea for some reason, just for having some caffeine or refreshment. Well, let's say for some reason coffee's price is incrementing for some reason. Well, people will go for tea if the price of the tea is fixed in that community, so they will consume less of coffee. Or let's say if the price of tea is falling while the price of coffee is fixed, people will consume more tea and less of coffee. And the other way around. Tastes. People also change their behavior and demand based on their own taste. You may tell me what will change the taste of people. There are many reasons. Seasonal reasons, like the change of seasons. For example, what we consume in summer is not exactly the thing that we consume in winter, especially in goods like beverages and things like for refreshment. We are not too much interested in hot drinks in summer, right? While we are interested in hot drinks during winter. So this is the idea. Tastes change based on different actually factors. However, economists usually do not study much of taste because it has psychological and sociological, maybe traditional roots, and they usually do not go deep in these aspects. We explain about expectation. Number of buyers. Well, the more buyers we have, the more demand we will have. So the idea of, I mentioned earlier about buying more of certain item due to the expectation, like sanitizer, and during this tough time of the outbreak of Corona, for example. Now, we also have more number of buyers. So a lot of consumers or buyers joining the market to buy the same item, and that increases the demand. All right, so we explain about the taste, we explain about the expectation, we explain about the number of buyers, we explain about the income, normal goods and inferior goods, prices of related goods. We explain about substitutes and complements. Oh, I explain about substitutes. I forgot to explain about complement good. It's placed here so that I explain about it. So I said about substitutes. Substitutes that two goods that one of them is substituting the other. Actually, think about coffee and tea. Just a simple example. In many cultures, coffee can replace tea in some way or in one way or another. Okay, these are substitutes. Or maybe ice cream and maybe iced yogurt, or maybe some other kind of iced stuff. So it's possible. So one of them may replace the other or substitute the other. So an increase in the price of one of them will make the demand of the other or the substitute to increase. A decrease in the price of one of them will make the demand decrease in the other item or product. So for the complements actually, it's exactly the opposite. Complements are actually two goods that they require the presentation together. That means they are attached to one another. Think about petrol and cars, gasoline and cars, for example. These are two products, or these two goods are usually attached. An increment in the price of cars will make usually less or decrease the consumption of oil, and an increment of the price of oil or the petrol will make or will decrease the consumption of cars. This is normal because they are complement. Think about maybe milk and coffee or cream and coffee, for example. And there are many other examples of complements. There are things that goods in our life that complement one another, and the price, the increment of one of them will compose a reduction. The increment of the price of one of them will compose a decrease or a reduction in the consumption of the other. All right. So this is the summary. Actually, these are the variables that influence, buyers. So one thing I didn't explain, actually, I forgot to mention. Let me just get back to the graph. We explain about the shift to the left and right based on some factor. How about if the price itself changes? I didn't explain about it. Let's say we fix the everything other than the price. The price is changing. What will happen to the demand, to the quantity demanded? Now look at this. Let me go to one of those. Let me go to this one. This one is clear. So now everything is fixed. We don't have any factor other than the price. If the price changes, what would happen? The quantity demanded will move along this demand curve. Along means what? If the price goes up, we will follow it on this curve upwards. So let's say the price here is 150. If it goes to 2, we will have to move along this curve up here. So this is like we have an arrow here, goes up. If the price drops from 150 to 1, we are going downwards here on the curve. Okay, this is the main difference. So let's go back to the same point where we were explaining. So the price of good itself represents movement along the demand curve. So upwards or downwards. If the price is going up, it will be going upwards on the demand curve. If the price is going down or decreasing, it will go downward on the curve. So income will shift the demand curve. It depends. If you have less income, you will have less demand. That means you will shift the demand curve to the left. And if you have more income, you will have more demand of some good or goods, and the curve will shift to the right. Prices of related goods, we explain about it. It depends, actually. It will make a shift in the curve, but depends on the type of related goods. If it is a substitute, A substitute, if there is an increase in the price of the good, or the increase in the price of the substitute, there will be decrease in, sorry, there will be an increase in the consumption or in the demand of the good that you are considering or you are buying. If there is a decrease in the price of a substitute, there will be also a decrease in the demand of the good or service that you are considering. Tastes, as I said, shift the curve depending on some factors. So tastes may change based on many factors, and we will not discuss them, we will not address them. I just give a factor of season factor. So that may be a good example. Expectations, we explain about expectation, and expectations may also be categorized to many. Just think about like certain expectations of having like more demand in future, maybe. So that will let you to buy more of that item. Or if you expect a reduction in the price of a certain item, you will spend less. Now let me tell you a good example here in Turkey. For example, we hear from time to time, it comes to the news that there is a reduction or there is a discount for the price of oil, and usually people hold on until that discount is applied. Then they go and fill up their tanks of fuel, or the fuel of their the tank of the fuel of their cars. So, well, why do not they spend at that moment on fuel? They hold their patience until the discount is applied. Why? Because they expect an decrement, or they expect a less price, a lower price. So that will make them consume less or demand less at that moment until the discount is applied. Number of buyers, as I said, if the number of buyers are less, there will be less demand. If the number of buyers if the number of buyers is less, there will be less demand. If the number of buyers is more, then there will be higher demand, and it will shift to the right. The more the number of the buyers is, the curve will shift to the right, and the less the number of buyers is, the curve will shift to the left. So right for the increment of number of buyers, left to the decrement of the number of buyers. So this is the main idea of the market force of demand. Then we understand that it's a market force, it controls the market, it contributes to the movement of the demand or the item based on certain factors. One of them is the main one of them is the price. Now think about how we can control one critical item that we have in our society or community, how we can reduce the consumption of cigarettes or smoke. There are many ways. The first one, let's say the public service announcements, mandatory health warning on cigarette packages, maybe prohibition of cigarette on advertisement on television or whatever. These will actually shift the curve to the left. That means reducing the demand, either by awareness or some certain limitation of advertisements or any other relevant thing. However, this is not exactly the way usually governments do it, although they do, but in order for them to have a quick reduction of cigarettes, usually they go for this. They try to increase the cigarette price. What happens? So if they increase the cigarette price by taxing the manufacturer, of course, when you tax the manufacturer, the seller of the cigarette increases the price. And the moment the seller of the cigarette increases the price, what happens? The demand will drop. So the demand will drop. This is like a previous study. If there is a 10% increment in the price, 4% reduction in smoking rate for adults. Not adults, actually, you can say for those who usually have their own income, regular income. How about teenagers? A 10% increment in the price makes a total decrement or total decrease in the smoking rate in teenagers of 12%. Why? Usually teenagers do not have their own source of income. They rely on their parents or whoever, their sponsor or guardian to support them financially. That's why they cannot spend much as those who have their own financial independence. However, 4% is not a little reduction in the overall smoking rate, and especially for the teenager slice or the teenager category of people, 12% is great actually. So usually this kind of taxation is applied to lower or to reduce the smoking rate by different governments. It's applied in different parts of the world to reduce the total consumption of cigarettes. Okay, this is the visualization of what we were explaining about the policy of smoking. So we may shift the curve by, the price of, if we increase the price of the packet or the cigarette itself, if we tax it. So this how things will be reduced like this. Now, this is the increment of the price by taxation, or maybe just direct increment. It depends actually, either by taxation or by applying a price policy. We may also have another like awareness policy, limiting certain advertisement or putting health concern or warning on the packet of the cigarette. It will shift the curve to the left, and it will allow people to consume less, or it will actually encourage people to consume less. Well, this is the end of this session, this part 1. I hope you guys will benefit and enjoy this video. Until I record the next session, have a good time and goodbye.